All right, so I'm going to work through setting up the development environment for CS2. So after you check to make sure that your computer does have virtualization enabled, and that how to check that is written in the instructions. The next thing is inside of Windows, we need to install the Windows subsystem for Linux and the virtual machine platform. So to do that, you'll be inside of Windows, click on Start, type in turn, and then you can click on turn Windows features on or off. Once this comes up, then you want to scroll all the way down to the bottom and check Windows Subsystem for Linux and Virtual Machine Platform. Click OK. Give it a second. Really doesn't take too terribly long to install this. Once it's done, it will ask you to restart the computer. And so you'll just want to click Restart Now and wait for the computer to restart all the way. Okay, we see that it is now finished making those changes. So we just click Restart Now, and then we just have to wait for the computer to restart, and then we can continue the rest of the installations. All right, so now that the computer is booted back up and we have the Windows subsystem for Linux and the virtual machine platform installed, now we can install the Ubuntu for WSL version. We can do that in Windows 11 and Windows 10 through the Microsoft Store. So if you do not have the Microsoft Store application down here on the taskbar, then you can click Start and either find it there or do a search for Store. Either way, that will bring up the Microsoft Store. Once this is up, now we need to search for Ubuntu. Now, the Ubuntu version that we want to install is just going to be the one without a version number on it. It doesn't really matter if you happen to install one of those other ones. It'll just be a more fixed version of the Ubuntu operating system. So you click on Ubuntu, and then you can click on Get, and then you just wait for it to download and install Ubuntu into the WSL environment. And depending upon the speed of your internet connection, this may take a couple of minutes. The half a gig download, and then it has to extract it. So wait for it to finish, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, we can see that it's now installed, so we can click Open, and this will launch the Ubuntu WSL environment. Now, most of you will probably get this notification. WSL registrar, this notification, WSL register distribution failed with error, blah, blah, blah. We need to visit this address. And if you control click on that, then that will bring up this web page, and we want to download and install this WSL2 Linux kernel update package for x64 machines. It's a pretty small download, so you just download it, then you run it. Once it's finished, click Next, and then we need to elevate it because it requires administrative rights. It goes and installs this, hit Finish, then you can go ahead and close out of your browser, close out of the Ubuntu window, and then you can open it again, and it should go through its installation process now. As it says, it takes a few minutes, usually doesn't take too terribly long. If it's a slower computer, it'll take longer than a newer computer, obviously, but usually it only takes about 30 seconds to a minute to finish. All right, once that is finished, now you need to enter a new username for this. The username doesn't really matter. It will just be used, or whatever is used inside of Ubuntu. I would recommend using your normal username. And then you need to give it a password. Now, the first thing to note about this is as you type the password, it does not echo out on the screen. So you want to choose a password. It doesn't need to be super secure because, again, this will only be used inside of this WSL window. But you want to create a password there and then enter the same password again. Notice that as I was typing, it did not echo out any of the characters I was typing. That is completely normal, and it should set up the password there. Now, if you do enter the password and it's mismatched, then it will prompt you a second time for the password and then to retype the password. All right, so once this is done, now we have Ubuntu running. In the future, in order to launch Ubuntu, we can go ahead and close out of that. And you click on Start, and it will be listed under these all apps here under U for Ubuntu, or as normal, you can search for it. And you can also pin this to start and pin it to the taskbar if you want an easier way of launching it every time. So now that the Ubuntu is installed and we have a user account created, now we need to start installing the software. So before we install the software, we need to do what's known as an apt update. And this goes out to the Ubuntu servers and downloads the most recent listing of software packages and versions. So we type sudo apt update, and then we type in that password that we previously created. Press enter, and we give it a second. And all this is doing is just grabbing that information from the Ubuntu servers. And once that's done, now we can go ahead and install the software. So it's sudo apt install build essential and C cache. Press enter. It'll come out with this list of what's going to be changed, what's going to be installed, what's going to be, or these will be installed, these new packages will be installed. Suggested packages, we don't need to worry about that. We can press just enter here, or we can press Y and then enter. And now this is going to go and install all of your tools to compile C++, C, Git will be installed as well. So you just need to wait for this to finish. It doesn't take too terribly long, just about a minute or so. And once it is done, now we can verify that we have the correct utilities installed by saying g++ -- version and git version. Now, your version number may be different than this. That doesn't matter. Same with the version number down there. As long as you get a similar output to this, you're good. And so this shows that we have both G++, which is our C++ compiler, and we have Git installed on the system, so we can synchronize with a Git repository, which we'll be using GitHub for this class. The next thing that we need to install is our IDE, or our Integrated Development Environment. And for this class, I use VS Code. So if you just do a search for VS Code, and there's a download there, or you can go to the web page and then go to download. Depends upon which search engine you use. Now, the version that we need to download is going to be this Windows version. Do not download the Linux version, even though WSL is running Linux. We just need to download the Windows version of it. And again, the download is about 100 megabytes, not too terribly big. And we want to go ahead and open that up and then start the installation process. Now, this installation, for the most part, you could just leave all the defaults the same. If you want to customize it for your own specific use, go ahead, but generally the defaults will work. And then once you finish and you click install, then it will go through and it will actually run the installation. And this doesn't take too terribly long to complete. Okay, we can see that it is finished with the installation of Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck this Launch Visual Studio Code and then click Finish, because we're not going to actually launch it from Windows. We're going to launch it from inside of this Ubuntu window here. So if you do not have the Ubuntu WSL window still open, make sure you open it back up. But then from here, you type code space period. And if you get this error there, and it's a good thing that I made this mistake because I forgot about this, this is saying, hey, we don't know what code is. And the reason for that is we have not reloaded the environment for Ubuntu to be able to know that Visual Studio Code is installed. The easy way to fix that, close out of Ubuntu, open it back up, and then you can type code space dot. And if everything went correctly, this should open up Visual Studio Code. Now, the first thing you will get is, do you trust the authors of the files in this folder? Go ahead and check the box and click yes, I trust the authors. Again, this is only going to be inside of WSL, and all the code that you're running is code that is provided for you or you wrote yourself. Now, the first thing and the most important thing we need to do is inside of WSL or inside of VS Code, click on Extensions, and then do a search for WSL. And we need to install this WSL extension here. You can click Install there, or you can click on it and then click on Install. Both ways will do the exact same thing. Once that is done, close out of VS Code and launch VS Code again. And you should see installing VS Code Server for Linux x64, downloading, unpacking, etc. If you see that, everything is good. And now you'll notice that you get this exact same message. If you notice the previous message, it had a different path here. That's because now it is actually running inside of WSL. So again, check the box, like yes, I trust the authors. And now you have VS Code set up to work with inside of WSL and inside of Ubuntu. And so now that we're done with that, we can go ahead and close out of VS Code. We'll go back into that at a later date just to start using it. But for right now, it is set up for the environment here. So now the next step that we're going to do is to configure the system to work with a GitHub repository and your GitHub account. So there's a couple of steps, and we'll just go through step by step. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create what's known as an SSH key. And so inside of your WSL window, type SSH-keygen, press enter, where it asks enter the file in which to save the key, just press enter. For the passphrase, do not enter a passphrase, just press enter again, and then enter for no password. And this now generated your SSH keys. And so there is a private key here, and there's your public key down here. And so the public key is what we will actually need. So what you want to do is you want to type cat space, and then you want this entire line, including the .pub there. So you can copy and paste it, or you can type it yourself. .ssh id rsa.pub. And this is the SSH public key that we will need to put into our GitHub account. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. So you can highlight it. If you just right click, that will copy. The nice thing about the newer version of WSL is you can Control C and that will copy it. It may or may not work depending upon the version of WSL you use, but definitely if you highlight and then right click, that will copy the public SSH key. And so now we want to log into your GitHub account. So we want to go to github.com. If you do not have an account yet, then make sure that you sign up for an account. Otherwise, if you have an existing account, then go ahead and log into that particular account. All right, so now we're logged into our GitHub account. And so we need to add that SSH key into our account. So on the upper right, you want to click on your icon up here, and you want to click on Settings. And then once you're in here, you want to go about halfway down and click on SSH and GPG keys. And these will be a list of all of your SSH and GPG keys which are added onto your account. You may not have any. I have a number just because I have many different systems. Doesn't really matter. But you want to click on New SSH Key. And for the title, just go ahead and give it something descriptive. Again, these are going to be device-specific keys. So you can do something like CS2, WSL. Yeah, CS2 WSL will work. Leave this on authentication key. And then down here, you want to paste the key that you had copied from your Ubuntu prompt. And again, you need to make sure that you have everything from SSH-RSA all the way down to the username at computer name. Click Add SSH Key. And if everything went correctly, then it should have added the key there. Now to verify that that is actually the key, if you look at this SHA-256 line there, you can go back to your Ubuntu window, and up here, it will have the exact same SHA-256 fingerprint. And that proves that this entry right here matches with this entry down here, and so that's the same key. Now that we're done with this, now we need to close out of our GitHub window, go back to our Ubuntu prompt, and we need to type SSH -T git at github.com. Now, you should get a notification like this, which says the authenticity of host github.com, et cetera, cannot or can't be established. You want to type yes. It'll add it to the list of known hosts, and then if everything went correctly, you should get, hi, your username, your GitHub username. You've successfully authenticated, but GitHub does not provide shell access. If so, great, you did everything correct. If you get an access denied or some other error that way, then there's a problem with your SSH key up on your GitHub account. So make sure that you grab the correct .pub key and you put it inside of GitHub. Now, for Git, we also need to do one more configuration, and that's to set the username and the user email for inside of Git itself, so that when you make commits, it will have a name and a password, or a name and an email address attached to it. So to do that, it's git config -- global user.name, double quotes, your name. And then you want to do the same thing, git config -- global user.email, your email address. And if you do everything correctly, you should not see any echo output anything there. And that only needs to be done the first time on any computer that you set up. After you do this, you should not ever need to do that again because it's set globally in the config. And now that you have that done, now you have your dev environment set up. The one last thing that we need to do is create a repository on GitHub and clone it to WSL so we can start working with the code. So to do that, I'm going to go back to GitHub. And I'm already logged in, so I'm just going to go ahead and create a new repository. So this is where you can configure the repository settings. The first thing is the repository name should be CS2, your username. And I already have a repository named that, so I'll just put a 2 at the end of it for now. Description, this is optional. Feel free to put it there if you want. It's not needed. Down here is the access settings, and we need to make sure that it's set to private. And private is very important, and that will be to where you have to invite me so I can see your code, but nobody else will be able to see it. You want to add a README file, and then add a .gitignore, and just do a search for C++, and click that. Don't worry about a license. This isn't going to be an open source project, and it's all private anyway, so you don't need a license. Now you click Create Repository. And this created your initial repository. Now, we need to clone this repository to our Ubuntu window. So up here on the green code, make sure it's on SSH here. And then you want to copy this line right here, the git at github.com : your username / the repository name you created. Go back to Ubuntu. And generally what I recommend is, instead of just filling up the root of your home directory with all sorts of repositories and everything, I like to create a projects folder. And so you just type mkdir projects. And now if you type ls, which lists the contents of where you're at, you'll see a projects folder there. So I want to change directory into projects. And now I want to clone this repository to this location. So I want to type git clone. And then since I had already copied this line here, to paste it here, you just right click. And that will paste that entire line into your terminal. Press enter. And assuming everything went correctly, Then it should say cloning into so on and so forth. And now if you type ls, you'll notice that there is a CS2-jbergen2, or whatever you named it, folder inside of this projects folder. And so now every day for class and whenever you want to work on homework, you want to launch Ubuntu, cd into projects, and then cd into that directory. This is case sensitive, so make sure that you enter that correctly. And then from this location, type code space dot. And this will launch VS Code from that location. And we'll notice a couple of things here. Over here is a source control. It flashed a little bit, but as we make changes to a file, so I'll just say some changes, and this indicates that the file is not saved. So file, save. This is getting tracked in our Git repository. And so now we can go to source control, and we have changes here. This shows what has been modified from what was originally there, what we had done. Shows that it's a modified file. So we can go ahead and stage those changes. We could type a message here. Testing, modifying the readme.md. And then you can click to commit. And so now we have one commit which has not been pushed up to our GitHub repository. And we can click sync changes, as it will push and pull. You can click OK, don't show again. I'll just go ahead and hit click OK for right now. And you'll see that it's spinning down there. It stops spinning. If it comes up asking if you want it to run, periodically run git fetch, you can go ahead and hit yes. But now that has been pushed up to our GitHub repository. So if we go back to GitHub and we refresh this here, notice that now we have some changes, and this was the message, the commit message that we had typed in there. So if you did all of that, congratulations. Your dev environment is all set up for CS2. Let me know if you have any questions or problems, and I'm happy to help.